Let's be clear from the outset. I'm not here for your judgment, nor am I seeking absolution. This isn't a confessional in the traditional sense. There will be no tears or dramatic rending of garments. Consider this a report, an emotional autopsy. Case File 1, the relationship of Sienna and Paige. Status, deceased. Time of death, approximately 1 week ago. My objective here, as the lead, and only pathologist, is to dissect the sequence of events leading to the cessation of all vital signs with the clinical detachment this subject deserves. The apartment is silent now, sterile, the perfect laboratory for this kind of work. The specimen, Paige, was, for lack of a better term, an unfinished work of art. She possessed this raw, captivating beauty, the kind that turned heads, but it was marred by what I identified as minor, correctable imperfections. A misplaced brushstroke of style here, a muted color palette of confidence there. From the moment we met, I saw her not just as a partner, but as a project. A beautiful, flawed canvas that, with my guidance and steady hand, could become the masterpiece I knew she was capable of being. I believed my role was not just to love her, but to elevate her. This report will document the methodology I employed in this refinement process and isolate the precise moment my intervention proved fatal. My core philosophy was simple, borrowed from the unforgiving logic of both nature and the corporate world. Pressure creates diamonds. I held the unwavering conviction that comfort breeds complacency, and that true growth is only ever achieved at the edge of one's comfort zone. My role, as I defined it, was to be the controlled, consistent pressure that would shape Paige into a more polished, more perfect version of herself. A version that would not only make her happier in the long run, but would also fit more seamlessly into the life I was meticulously constructing for us. This pressure manifested as a series of ongoing critiques, which I framed as constructive feedback sessions. They were never delivered in anger. My tone was always calm, analytical, like a coach reviewing game footage with a promising athlete. For instance, there was the wardrobe initiative. Paige had a fondness for soft, comfortable clothes that, in my assessment, did little to flatter her figure. Before a dinner with my colleagues, people whose opinions mattered, she emerged from the bedroom in a floral dress she adored. I remember tilting my head, my expression neutral. That pattern, I stated, adds a visual 10 pounds. It makes your hips look unfortunate. I watched the light in her eyes flicker, then die. She didn't argue. She simply turned around, went back into the bedroom, and re-emerged in the sleek black dress I had picked out for her weeks prior. At the dinner, she received compliments. On the car ride home, I gave her a performance review. I praised her for engaging with my boss, but noted that her laugh was a bit too loud, a bit too unrestrained. I suggested a more modulated, sophisticated chuckle for future engagements. She just stared out the window at the passing city lights, nodding silently. Her weight was another variable I monitored with the precision of a dietitian. I never called her fat. That would be crude and unproductive. Instead, I used precision. When we'd be grocery shopping, I'd pick up a pint of her favorite ice cream, examine the nutritional label with a thoughtful frown, and say, "Is this really aligned with your goal of feeling more energetic?" Then I'd place it back in the freezer. I managed her diet under the guise of shared health goals, gradually phasing out the carbs she loved and replacing them with kale smoothies I'd prepare for her. I was her supportive partner, her wellness guide. This extended to every facet of her presentation. Her naturally curly hair, which I deemed unprofessional, was gradually tamed into submission with a collection of high-end straighteners and anti-frizz serums I gifted her. "Just think of the time you'll save," I'd reason. Soon, she was straightening it daily, the vibrant curls replaced by a sleek, manageable sheet of brown. Another successful data point. Even her speech was subject to optimization. She had a charming habit of using slang picked up from her younger sister. I would gently correct her mid-sentence. "I believe the term you're looking for is excellent, not fire," I'd say with a patient smile. Over time, her anecdotes became shorter, more guarded, as if she were beta testing every word before it left her lips. I was the architect of her self-improvement. I curated her Instagram feed, encouraging her to post only the most flattering photos, often after I had made minor edits to her waistline or jaw. I told her it was about building her personal brand. In my mind, I wasn't tearing her down. I was building her up, brick by painful brick. Every time she acquiesced, changed the dress, skipped the dessert, straightened her hair, corrected her speech, it reinforced my belief in the efficacy of my methods. I saw her compliance not as a sign of her spirit breaking, but as proof that the system was working. It was a flawless, logical process. I was helping her. I was making us better. And I genuinely, tragically believed it. In any scientific study, one must account for pre-existing conditions. Paige had one. It was a faint, silvery line, barely an inch long, that cut through the arch of her right eyebrow. A scar. To me, it was a minor cosmetic flaw, easily concealed with the right makeup, a tiny imperfection on an otherwise pristine canvas. To her, however, it was the physical manifestation of a core trauma, a fault line running directly to the epicenter of her self-worth. One night, about 6 months into our relationship, after a bottle of wine and under the soft glow of the lamp in our bedroom, she told me its origin story. The atmosphere was intimate, confessional. She was tracing the scar with her fingertip, a nervous, unconscious habit I had noticed before. She said she was 9. A group of older boys had cornered her in the schoolyard, taunting her for being a bookworm. One of them shoved her, hard. She fell, and her head hit the sharp corner of a concrete bench. She remembered the shock, the warmth of the blood, and most vividly, the ringleader's sneering voice saying, "Look what you did, you ugly freak. You scarred yourself for life." As she recounted this, her voice was barely a whisper. Her entire posture changed. She seemed to shrink, her shoulders curling inward as if to protect herself from the memory. "It's stupid, I know," she'd said, looking at me with a vulnerability that was almost painful to witness. "But whenever I look at it, I just hear his voice. I feel like that helpless, clumsy little girl again, the one everyone stared at." She made me promise explicitly that it would be our secret, a wound that I would never poke, even in jest. It was her one non-negotiable boundary, her red line. "Please, Sienna," she had pleaded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Never that, anything but that." I promised, of course. I held her and told her it was barely noticeable, that she was beautiful, that those boys were monsters. And I meant it, in my own way. But in the clinical framework of my mind, this information was not processed as a sacred trust. It was cataloged. It became a known variable, a documented sensitivity. In my report, I would have labeled it, "Subject exhibits an extreme psycho-emotional response to stimuli related to a minor facial imperfection, scar, right eyebrow. Prognosis, a potential point of leverage, but one to be handled with extreme caution." I recognized its power. I understood its significance as a symbol of her deepest insecurity. It was the key to the most fragile room in her heart, and she had just handed it to me for safekeeping. And I filed that knowledge away, fully aware of its destructive potential, like a chemist noting the explosive properties of a newly synthesized compound. The catalyst for systemic failure occurred at my sister's engagement party. This was a high-stakes event, a convergence of family and my most influential professional contacts. For weeks, I had been coaching Paige on her presentation. This was her final exam, our public debut as the power couple I envisioned. By my metrics, she was prepared. That evening, she looked flawless. I can find no other word. She was the living embodiment of my successful project. Her hair, a testament to the daily straightening regimen, fell in a perfect, glossy sheet. The navy dress, my selection, was the epitome of understated elegance. Her makeup was a masterclass in subtlety. She radiated a quiet confidence that, for a moment, even I had to admire. She was standing by the front door, waiting for me, and as I approached, she gave my hand a squeeze. "I'm not even nervous," she whispered, a small, hopeful smile on her face. "Not with you here." It was in this moment that my hubris became terminal. I saw the project as complete, but I couldn't resist one final, unnecessary flourish, a final quality check to affirm my mastery. I stepped closer, pretending to adjust her collar, a gesture of public intimacy. I leaned in, my voice a conspiratorial whisper, meant to sound like a shared secret, a final boost of confidence. "You know," I said, a light, easy smile on my own face. "Your concealer work is incredible tonight. You can barely even see that ugly little scar." I said it just like that. The words left my mouth with a casual, almost cheerful cruelty. In my mind, it was the ultimate compliment. "My training has been so effective that you've even learned to perfectly mask your deepest flaw." It was meant to be a final affirmation of my success and hers, the final polish on the masterpiece. The reaction was not what I anticipated. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, instantaneous shutdown. It wasn't a gasp, but the opposite, a sudden, total cessation of breath. I watched the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin a waxy, translucent color. The hopeful smile didn't just vanish, it was erased. Her eyes, which had been bright and full of affection moments before, became utterly vacant. It was like watching a light bulb not just burn out, but shatter inside its glass casing, plunging the entire system into darkness. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just stared at a point somewhere over my shoulder, her entire being retracting inward to a place I couldn't reach. After a long, silent moment that felt like an eternity, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement of a received transmission, and then she said nothing at all. At the party, Paige was a ghost in a navy blue dress. She performed her role perfectly, a testament to her training. She smiled, she nodded, she engaged in polite, superficial conversation, but her eyes remained empty. She was a beautifully programmed automaton. To anyone else, she was the picture of poise. But I, the programmer, could see the crashed code behind the screen. She kept a careful, physical distance from me all night. If I reached for her hand, she would conveniently need to grab a drink. If I moved to stand beside her, she would spot an acquaintance across the room and glide away. The car ride home was a vacuum. The silence was so absolute it felt like a physical pressure in my ears. I tried to breach it, of course. "My sister loved your gift," I offered. She just stared out the window. "I thought the night was a success, didn't you?" Nothing. I began to feel a prickle of irritation. This was childish, an overreaction. I had paid her a compliment on her makeup skills. Was she really going to ruin a perfectly good evening over this? The next day, I went to work, assuming she would get over it. I expected to come home to a sulking girlfriend, whom I would have to patiently talk down from her emotional ledge, explaining once again how my logic was for her own good. But when I walked through the door that evening, the silence was different. It wasn't tense anymore, it was empty. Her side of the closet was bare. The bathroom counter was stripped of her skincare products. Her toothbrush was gone. The bookshelf had neat, rectangular gaps where her favorite paperbacks used to be. She had even taken the small, ridiculously cheerful succulent she kept on the kitchen windowsill. There was no note, no angry text, no missed call. I checked my phone. I had been blocked on everything. I tried calling from my work phone. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. She hadn't just left. She had been surgically excised from my life. It was a clean, silent, and devastatingly efficient amputation. She had ghosted me so completely it felt less like a breakup and more like a disappearance. My initial reaction was not grief, but a cold, intellectual fury. The sheer unprofessionalism of it all was galling. To terminate a 2-year contract without a single exit interview. Unacceptable. I began my investigation phase, reaching out to our mutual friends, expecting to gather allies for my side of this dispute. The response was a uniform wall of polite, awkward deflection. Our friend Amelia, usually a bubbling font of gossip, suddenly became incredibly vague. "Oh, I think she's just taking some time for herself, she stammered when I called. She just said she needed space. When I pressed for details, for a location, for any information at all, Amelia's voice became strained. "Sienna, I don't think I should get in the middle of this. I have to go." Click. It was the same with everyone. They weren't hostile, but they were distant. It was the social equivalent of watching people slowly back away from a chemical spill. They didn't condemn me. They simply created a quarantine zone around me, and I was patient zero. The isolation was disorienting. For a week, I lived in the sterile silence of the apartment, my own theories echoing in the emptiness. She was being dramatic. She would be back. This was a tactic. Then the physical evidence presented itself. I was doing a deep clean, an attempt to impose order on the chaos, when I decided to clear out the small wooden box on her old nightstand where she kept odds and ends. Inside, beneath a few ticket stubs and a dried flower, was a single sheet of notebook paper, folded in half. I opened it. It was a list, written in Paige's familiar, looping handwriting. The title at the top read, "Reasons to Stay with Sienna." There were 4 bullet points. She's smart and challenges me. She pushes me to be better. She makes me feel safe. We could have a beautiful future, but each one had a thick, angry line drawn through it. Scratched out with such force the pen had nearly torn the paper. I flipped the sheet over. On the back there was just one sentence, written in a shaky, uneven script, as if composed during an earthquake. She called my scar ugly. Beside the sentence was a small, half-finished heart. The second half of it trailed off into a violent, black scribble, a chaotic vortex of ink where the love was supposed to be. It was the final entry in a logbook I never knew she was keeping. It was the conclusive finding, the cause of death recorded by the victim herself. So this concludes the formal autopsy. The findings are clear. Cause of death: catastrophic emotional hemorrhage, precipitated by a direct, targeted verbal assault on a known core trauma. The subject system, already weakened by a sustained regimen of high-pressure criticism, experienced a total and irreversible shutdown. The report is complete. The data is analyzed. The conclusion is logical and inescapable. I sit here now, in the silent, sterile apartment, the pathologist who has successfully identified the poison I administered. I hold the evidence in my hand, this flimsy piece of paper with its scratched-out hopes and its one damning sentence. And yet, the clinical detachment I've maintained throughout this process is beginning to fracture. The sterile lab is starting to feel like a prison cell. A cold, rational voice in my head, the voice of the pathologist, says, "Case closed. Archive the file and move on." But another voice, a frantic, unfamiliar one, is screaming from the morgue drawer. It keeps replaying the moment before the party, her hopeful smile, the light in her eyes. It keeps tracing the shape of that violent, black scribble next to her words. My logical mind tells me I did this to create a stronger, better version of her. My gut, an organ I've long ignored, is telling me I just wanted to control something beautiful until it broke. The pathologist in me knows the subject is gone. The woman in me can't stop checking my phone for a ghost.